This is CBC Vancouver News.
We just contend that as a 90-pound, 5-foot-tall person that they should have been able to figure out another way to deal with it.
The family of a young person killed by North Vancouver Mounties while in mental distress wants to know more about their final moments.
It's nice to finally get a chance to put a person to the name and to the crime.
Relief and sadness for the daughters of a man murdered by 2 escaped inmates on Vancouver Island. One of his killers has now been sentenced. And only in Canada, moose try to catch a plane in Prince George. Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. The family of a 27-year-old killed last month after an interaction with RCMP on the North Shore is sharing their story for the first time. They say their child, Danny, was experiencing a mental health crisis when Mounties were called. As Michelle Gassoub reports, they still have few answers about the final moments of Danny's life, and a warning: some details in this story are upsetting.
Danny Cooper was a well-known advocate for social justice who loved to write songs and poems.
Let's pretend I'll come back out the coffin after I go in.
The 27-year-old, the kind of person who sometimes came home soaking wet after giving away their raincoat to someone who didn't have one.
They really cared about everybody, and that they were small on the outside but huge on the inside. They really did walk the walk.
Danny was fatally shot by North Vancouver RCMP in November while in a state of mental distress. Their family now left wondering why lethal force was used.
We just contend that as a 90-pound, 5-foot-tall person that they should have been able to figure out another way to deal with it. I used the analogy about a couch cushion, that they could have been knocked off their feet with sufficient mass and force just from this throw cushion. So we have a hard time understanding why 5 police officers with cut-proof leather gloves and armored vests and jackets needed to resort to that so quickly.
At the time, Danny was suffering an episode of a psychoaffective disorder they'd been diagnosed with and had picked up a small serrated steak knife in front of their mother. Neighbors called police for a wellness check and 5 officers arrived on the scene. Besides that, the family knows few details of their final moments.
To this point, we don't even know whether non-lethal force was used in any degree. We don't know how many times they were shot. It's fairly unbelievable that we wouldn't have basic details.
It could be up to 6 months before they get those answers, as they wait for the Independent Investigation Office of BC to determine whether police actions were justified.
We will try to conclude this matter in as timely a manner as we can, but I also want to assure the public that this is a thorough, comprehensive and objective assessment of the facts.
In Victoria, where Danny earned a degree in social justice, a mural has been painted in their honor outside one of their favorite bakeries. Among the causes Danny campaigned for, that police be removed from mental health wellness checks.
It is truly ironic that their life cause was to campaign for people who were marginalized in society and who didn't have the same tools to deal with confronting the police.
A cause Danny's father says he'll now take up as his own. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, North Vancouver.
An emotional day at BC Supreme Court where an escaped inmate was sentenced for the murder of a Vancouver Island father in 2019. 60-year-old Martin Payne's daughters shared their grief with the court, and a warning: this story contains some upsetting details.
Unnecessary, selfish, reckless.
It seems to me it was so much in vain. They had one day out of prison and they killed our father to have that one day. It's extremely senseless.
Today, a Supreme Court judge sentenced James Lee Bush on the left to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. A jury convicted him yesterday of first-degree murder. Co-accused Zachary Armitage pleaded guilty to the same charge midway through the trial. The pair escaped from William Head Prison in Metchosin near Victoria in 2019. A day later, Martin Payne was killed. The judge told Bush, quote, "You extinguished the life of a man simply returning from work on a Monday afternoon, and you butchered and mutilated him." Calla Payne told the court she suffers from PTSD and anxiety since her father was killed, but she and her sister feel empowered by sharing memories of their dad. Zachary Armitage, meanwhile, has a sentencing hearing set for Tuesday. A first-degree murder conviction does carry with it an automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Some Indigenous people living in Vancouver are turning to traditional foods to cope with higher prices at the grocery stores. But what has been a good way to save money is now harder to pull off. Indigenous Affairs reporter Wamish Hamilton has more on the tough choices some are making.
No freezers years ago, so we use coarse salt.
Lynn Doolin is from the Lakwalams First Nation near Prince Rupert. She's lived in East Van for almost a decade. But each year, she goes home to harvest traditional foods.
It's the food that I travel home to in Lakwalams. I go home in May and July to harvest seafood. My family is big seafood harvesters, and it gets us through the winter, so we don't rely too much on going to the grocery store.
In previous years, Doolin would return with just enough to share with family or for special occasions that called for traditional food. She says the rising cost of food in the grocery store is forcing her to rely more on her traditional foods to offset costs.
So expensive. I went to the grocery store a couple of days ago, and it was almost a $600 bill, and barely seen anything in my freezer or my fridge or my cupboards. And it was like, wow, it's crazy.
Doolin's finding herself in a catch-22 situation. She's gathering food to save money, but the cost of getting that access is rising ever higher. Traveling to harvest salmon, shellfish, seaweed, and more, getting tougher to pull off.
I'm looking to 2023. I'm hoping, because the sockeye is not guaranteed every year. And so I kind of got to stretch it. I've got to be mindful to not take it for granted that I do have it. And because sockeye might not show up in 2023, and then I won't have any seafood for the winter next year.
Sharing food is an important Indigenous cultural practice, but necessity means that Doolin will be forced to keep what she gathers for herself and for her immediate family.
I was generous, like sharing with family and friends, but I don't think I can do that now because I have to save it for my family.
Doolin says Indigenous people don't have the same ability to collect traditional food in an urban center. However, those foods are what make up her identity as a Lakwalams person, and going without, simply not an option.
Biggest thing that we need to remember is that for Indigenous peoples, food is not just calorie or nutrition, but food is identity. Food is the land. And so when all of that is in combination together, that food preservation method is more than just value-added process. It's more than just kind of lengthening the shelf life, but it's a way to preserve their identity. It's a way for them to ensure their food sovereignty. And at the moment, that food sovereignty is under threat because of rising inflation, because of lack of land access, and also because there's a lack of opportunities to actually share these types of knowledges in many different places. We're just not investing enough on Indigenous spaces.
Doolin hopes that accessing that food could be done closer to home, that harvesting might be a cultural right in the Vancouver area spread out to the urban Indigenous populations, a way of tackling the rising cost of food and spreading the wealth amongst a population that's especially feeling the pinch. Wamish Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's privacy watchdog has a serious warning for you. They say millions of sensitive personal health records are, quote, disturbingly vulnerable to leaks. In its report, the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner for BC writes that the province's system used to store personal information, including health numbers, immunization records, and patient histories, is vulnerable and could be subject to intrusion from bad actors. The authors say the province should put in basic security measures like complete encryption and multi-factor authentication for everybody.
We've recently seen in Ontario, they discovered an internal breach, the kind of thing that we're talking about, a year later after the fact. And so that's not what we want to have happen here.
The report says the Provincial Health Services Authority has known about the issue for at least 3 years. BC's Health Minister says PHSA has made some of the recommended changes already, including a system upgrade in July.
They have made some progress, and you can see that, but they've got to continue to do that. And if we'd done all the recommendations in full, and we're there now, we'd still have to make progress because the demand is going to change and evolve, and we've got to get better and better.
Roughly 4,000 people have access to the PHSA system, including healthcare workers and ministry officials doing public health surveillance to track the spread of diseases like COVID-19. Still with health now, a youth drug and alcohol treatment facility in Vancouver wants families to know it has space. The Peak House is a live-in center for youth 13 to 18. It opened in the 1980s and has always been swamped with long application wait times. But since the pandemic, the 8-bed center has regularly had several beds open. The executive director is worried people don't know their services are even there.
There's this overwhelming pressure to be joyful and happy. And a lot of people are really suffering. And so when we're in these periods of suffering, we want people to know that there is help available.
3 beds are open right now. The 10-week live-in treatment program is free for youth and families. More than a year after the new facility for St. Paul's Hospital was announced, we're getting a sneak peek at the new health campus being built on the False Creek Flats. A model of the hospital was constructed at a warehouse. The actual building, though, will have more single-patient rooms, larger operating theaters, and overall boosted capacity. All told, it will be more than twice the size of the current hospital, which has stood for more than a century.
Can we make spaces, design them to be flexible, to meet current needs that always are changing in healthcare, but also meet the needs that we're trying to predict in 10, 20, 30 years' time?
Construction is set to be finished in 2027. Meanwhile, UBC researchers have identified a compound that could potentially stop infections of COVID and the common cold. It's part of a group of drugs called GSK3 inhibitors that researchers have been studying to fight diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer. Now, scientists in BC have discovered they could also be used to stop infections. The compound works by targeting a human cellular process rather than the virus itself, which then prevents the virus from growing. A family set to be deported on December 19th from BC will now be allowed to stay for now. Healthcare worker Claudia Zamorano and her family fled Mexico for our province almost 5 years ago after death threats from organized crime groups. They applied for permanent residency in Canada last year, but it wasn't processed in time and they were at risk of getting sent back.
They've been really valuable members of our community. They've become our friends and family, and we're fighting so that they can stay here in Canada.
The family's removal order will be stayed until the judicial review of their deportation is finished. Their permanent residency application will be processed separately. Time for part 2 of our look at Metro Vancouver's worst parking lots. From homes to highways, governments step in all the time when it comes to infrastructure and building. But what about parking lots? After looking at the worst lots in the region yesterday, our Justin McElroy is now finding out why the system may be so flawed.
This is a bad parking lot. Is this the worst parking lot in the city?
Yeah. My God, it's so dangerous.
It's just the parking, the way people drive.
It should be a little bit bigger.
But why did the lot at 41st and Victoria win the title of worst parking lot in Metro Vancouver? To find out, we brought in a man who, in a professional capacity, has analyzed thousands of parking stalls.
I would consider myself very well versed in the art of parking lot design.
Ironically, Thompson says he's seen plenty of parking lots that are much worse.
Its biggest fault is it's a victim of its own success. The businesses here are popular. The people want to come here. They know it.
But he says that when it comes to parking lot design, there are 3 key elements: access to the lot, circulation in the lot, and interface with the street. And in all 3 areas, the winner, falls short.
The amount of queuing space right at the access point, what's called the magazine storage, is limited. Typically if you're coming into a shopping center or plaza, you would be looking for maybe at least double that amount of space.
As for circulation, the narrow lanes, confusing yellow lines, and poor signage about the relief lot at the back add another layer of complication for drivers. And with just one entry close to a busy intersection, it all adds up to a confusing and hazardous situation.
Again, it comes back down to that behavioral and innate feeling that you get, when you're somewhere new or different. If you can present the information to make people feel more comfortable, then maybe you'll have fewer parking issues.
Now, bad parking lots come in all shapes and sizes, but when one is this bad and this notorious, is there anything anyone can do?
We don't have a lot of tools to go back to a parking lot that's already been built to tell them to do something differently if they're in accordance with their existing plans.
Once a lot is approved, it pretty much stays that way, unless some bigger group with responsibility feels the need to take action. But will they in this case? When we asked London Drugs about the lot, they said they understand it's a challenge and said it was up to the local developer that owns the space, Westbank, to make the changes. But when we asked Westbank about it, they said it was a typical lot for its time, complied with bylaws when it was approved, and while they acknowledge issues, agree with Thompson that too many people are using it. So, to recap, a government says its hands are tied, a business points fingers at a developer, and a developer points fingers at the government for approving it in the first place. It turns out, parking lots have plenty of politics. So how would you make this parking lot better? Based on what we heard, it's pretty simple. Extend the length of the access point, get rid of a few stalls, make it clear that you can drive to the back, and put up signage that lets people know there's an overflow lot to the side. It still wouldn't be a great parking lot, but it definitely wouldn't be the worst. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
Have you ever seen a moose try to catch a plane? Only in BC. Hope they have ID. 4 of the massive creatures were spotted at Prince George Airport in a video posted on Facebook recently. The airport says the operations team spotted the majestic animals during a runway check. It guided them out of the airfield through a gate and to safety. Community safety officers are working to provide support for vulnerable people in Nanaimo. But some say the resources could be better allocated to those in need. That story's next. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Thanks for being here. Several artists in Regina have been chosen to create pieces for a winter-themed exhibit in the city's downtown. They say the chance holds a special significance by showcasing Indigenous art. Take a look.
Warmth, shelter, and winter wonderland were themes artists were asked to create in the city of Regina. 2 students at the First Nations University of Canada took on the challenge. Now, their work is featured in the city's Victoria Park.
I came up with this idea, this concept of having the teepee design, and then as the teepee gradualizes, if you go on the side, you can see the shape of a buffalo. And the reason being for that is the teepee, historically we lived in teepees and they were our homes, and the buffalo provided the shelter or the covering for those homes.
Callista Moser's sculpture was also selected. Her piece was made with the Winter Wonderland theme in mind. She says she was inspired by the fact that downtown Regina is very rectangular and uniform, and wanted to feature something more aesthetically pleasing and eye-catching for Victoria Park.
Awesome and the point of it, and it's a great conversation starter. So many people walk up to it and are just like, oh, this is so cool, and then they start talking about what they see and everything.
Being Indigenous and having their work featured in the downtown location was very important to both artists.
It means a lot, not only to myself, but being a student from the First Nations University in the Fine Arts Department, to have our recognition, within the city of Regina that used to be formerly the Pile of Bones, right? And then to have the Indigenous concept behind it.
The exhibit will be up until February of next year, which leaves lots of times for others to view the art, take in their meanings, or develop their own. Jennifer Francis, CBC News, Regina.
Community safety officers are now out in Nanaimo. They're, in addition to Mounties, they focus on helping vulnerable people in that city. But as Claire Palmer reports, some say the resources could be better used elsewhere.
The program takes a compassionate approach to safety.
We're not going after enforcement right away. It's working with the individuals to educate them.
From the RCMP to social work, officers come from a variety of backgrounds.
The city wanted to look after our citizens here and developed a team of unique officers that deal with mental health, homelessness, and social disorder issues that are one of the big priorities with the citizens of Nanaimo.
Officers are deployed from 6 a.m. until 1:30 a.m., mainly patrolling downtown. They look for anyone sleeping unsheltered and to see if anyone needs medical attention. In the month of October, they responded to close to 700 calls.
CSOs are a tremendous addition to our community. It's an extra layer that we have to service the public.
But some critics are saying resources would be better allocated to other programs first. Siobhan Johnson runs a nonprofit providing safe and accessible resources for the Mid-Island homeless community. She says it's unfortunate social services weren't funded first.
To start from an enforcement place, especially when there is nowhere for individuals who are unhoused or part of a drug user population to even currently go, it really just doesn't make any sense.
Johnson says a coordinated access center and better resources would give the CSOs more to work with.
I certainly don't think that they have an easy job in our community, and it would be a lot more, I think, progressive and forwarding as far as resolving the challenges that we currently see in this community.
I'm just going to check on this guy right here.
The program is funded through the city and is one of 5 in BC. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
There's a live look at Revelstoke. No train coming yet. One day more before more winter weather arrives on the south coast. Johanna will have your BC wine weather forecast right after this.
War toys are among the hottest selling items this Christmas. For instance, Transformers by Hasbro. Their slogan, more than meets the eye. And that's really true when you flip it around and read the small print on the back. There's a thing called tech specs that you're supposed to clip out as a kid and keep. It tells you what the models are for. This model's specialty, fear can hit targets unreachable to bullets. Or this one here, called Venom. Friends are more dangerous than enemies. And this model as well, it's called Snarl. Only in war is there happiness. Now these are supposed to be characters from a cartoon show, but the manufacturer recommends these toys for children as young and as impressionable as 6 years old. So what do you like about these toys?
I think they're neat.
Isn't that a bad guy though? He likes war.
He likes fighting the good guys. I like them to go on war too.
Go to war?
Yep.
What is it that you don't like about these toys?
They encourage violence. They encourage intimidation by fear. Some of them encourage, or at least passively encourage, stealing. All the things that society has deemed unacceptable.
All major department stores sell Transformers, and almost all are sold out. There are more realistic war toys like G.I. Joe. His accessories now include a flamethrower to incinerate his enemies. Even stores making money on the trend are getting concerned. They say if you think this year is bad, wait till next year, when toys based on the restricted movie Rambo come onto the market.
The amazing thing is, though, that seeing as it is a restricted movie, and children supposedly shouldn't be seeing this movie, it's amazing that they're going to make a toy license out of it, because most children shouldn't have even heard of Rambo.
David, don't worry, this doesn't have any bullets in.
Some argue kids have always played war, be it good guys versus bad guys, cowboys and Indians, or Transformers. But those who are concerned say manufacturers more than ever are telling kids just how to play and behave. And the message gets uglier.
So I encourage any parents who have bought these toys to stop, take them out of their closet, send them back to the store, and those who've considered buying them, don't do it. And that way, somebody is bound to get our message.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace, installing the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
Our BC-wide weather forecast with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe now. Joe, we get one more day. Is that it?
That's right. Well, we get more days than that in general.
I would hope so. That's a bit of a hard out.
Exactly. Breaking news. One more day. But we just have one more day of the calm weather, Dan. Yeah, generally high pressure is going to last for another 24 hours, and then we've got a system moving in from the north, and then a deep freeze for next week. So taking you down to a -1 overnight. We will watch for that fog, quite high moisture content. So with that sinking air mass still in place, look for that patchy fog again tomorrow morning. And then highs back up to 4 for Tuesday with mainly sunny skies. It's tomorrow night that we'll start to see things change. And it's this low pressure system that's sliding down, dragging down cooler air, as well as that shot of snow. Prince George getting into a couple centimeters tomorrow. Cranbrook, you'll also see that light snow through the day, getting down to the Okanagan tomorrow night. And for us, we're really going to see that snow through Saturday and Sunday. But I'll break that down on the south coast in just a moment. It'll also be dragging down that cold air, as I mentioned. Here's Tuesday. That's really when we'll feel the coldest of the air, really the coldest ever gets here on the south coast in the forecast for next week. So when we get a Pacific system clipping in for next Tuesday, Wednesday, that is going to fall as snow. So we have a couple of snowfall events to get through next week on top of the cold air. Tomorrow, that one more day goes for everyone across the province pretty much. As I mentioned, we'll get some snow tomorrow night and through Prince George. Those flurries will kick in tomorrow evening as well, down and through the Okanagan. But look at that air mass. The purples, that's the true Arctic air mass. This is a polar vortex that will spread across the country. Really, that just means the northern circulation has made its way all the way down south. So breaking it down for Vancouver, 4, increasing cloud tomorrow. Starting off as a wintry mix for Saturday because temperatures are above the freezing mark. I think we'll see some rain, back to snow, and then into the deep freeze. But I'll keep my eye on Christmas Eve because we might just get one round of rain before Christmas. We'll see.
It would be classic South Coast. Yeah, we're going to tease you then. Nope.
I know, right?
Green Christmas, everyone.
For real.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
That is your late news for Thursday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news at any hour, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. That starts tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. And I will be your host for your 6 p.m. news tomorrow night. So we'll see you then. Take care.